Welcome to the Global War Watch Network. Imagine a border transformed not just, by a physical barrier, but by an invisible wall of surveillance, an unprecedented military presence, and policies that ripple into pretty much every aspect of a migrant's journey. Today, we're cutting through the noise to understand how U.S. immigration policy at the southern border, particularly under the Trump administration, has fundamentally reshaped human lives and, well, international relations. We'll be extracting critical insights from a stack of sources you provided, from detailed reports by organizations like the American Immigration Council and Bullywell, that's the Washington office on Latin America, to the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF, and recent field observations from AP News. Our mission is to understand the layers of policy, technology, and, crucially, the human cost involved. So, what exactly are we going to unpack today?
We're going to examine how the U.S. Mexico border has been profoundly transformed by President Trump's foreign policy approach, which, as our sources highlight, views immigration largely through a national security lens. I mean, that's the core perspective here.
It's security lens.
Right.
Yeah. And this involves a significant increase in military involvement, what some are calling a virtual wall of surveillance technology, and some really strict policies that have generated a severe humanitarian crisis. We'll also explore the real-world impacts, including the, frankly, alarming issue of undercounted migrant deaths, and look at some surprising current trends, like the often mischaracterized facts about fentanyl smuggling.
Okay, let's unpack this transformation then. The sources, they reveal a pretty dramatic shift, almost a redefinition of border enforcement. We're seeing this huge increase in military presence. What are the core components of this expanded military role? How does it actually differ from, historical norms?
Well, what's really fascinating here is just the sheer scale of the change. Under President Trump's emergency declaration, U.S. troop deployments at the border reportedly tripled. Tripled, reaching an astonishing 7,600 personnel from every branch of the military. And this isn't just a slight adjustment. It's a full integration happening even as overall attempted illegal crossings were actually plummeting.
So fewer crossings, but more military.
Exactly. The critical insight from our sources is that the military is no longer just providing, intermittent support. They're now central to deterring crossings. They're taking on roles that traditionally belonged pretty much exclusively to civilian law enforcement.
That's a huge shift. So what does this actually mean on the ground? Are soldiers just observing, or are they actively involved in enforcement, maybe even apprehending people?
They are absolutely actively involved, which is a major departure from the past.
Mm-hmm.
Large swaths of the border have been designated militarized zones.
Militarized zones.
Yeah. Our sources, including that AP News piece, explain that this empowers U.S. troops to apprehend immigrants and others accused of trespassing on Army, Air Force, or Navy bases. And it authorizes additional criminal charges that can mean actual prison time.
Wow.
We see military personnel sharing command stations and even vehicles with civilian immigration authorities. It's very integrated.
Hmm.
The military itself describes their troops as being, quote, untethered from typical maintenance tasks, meaning they're now working closely with Border Patrol agents in high-traffic areas and deploying rapidly to remote, unguarded terrain. Major General Scott Naumann even referred to it as a secret sauce of integrating at every level.
A secret sauce of integration. That sounds like it fundamentally blurs lines that have historically been quite distinct, right?
Absolutely.
I was particularly struck by that AP News piece highlighting Army Straight Anna Harker-Molina. She's an immigrant herself.
Right, that detail stood out.
And she speaks of the tedium, but also pride in the deterrence. It paints this picture of soldiers like her deployed to remote stretches, observing, reporting, directly contributing to border security. It fundamentally changes their day-to-day duties. But it raises an important question regarding established legal norms, doesn't it?
It really does.
What do the legal experts cited in the sources say about this expanded military role?
This is where it gets really critical. Legal experts cited in our sources describe this expanded military role as norm-breaking and unusual. It puts the military in an awkward position, that's how they phrase it, because of the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act.
Oh, Posse Comitatus.
Exactly. This is a foundational law that fundamentally separates the military from domestic policing, from domestic law enforcement.
So using troops this way isn't just unusual.
No, experts are calling it a gray area or even a potential violation that pushes right up against these established legal norms. It's presented as a significant expansion, a force multiplier for integration operations, sure, but it comes with considerable legal and ethical considerations that are being actively debated.
Okay, so we've explored the sheer scale of militarization. But the human story here is, well, perhaps even more jarring. Our sources are pretty unflinching. These policies, particularly the Trump administration's approach, have had direct and severe humanitarian consequences. Let's zoom in on one of the most impactful, the Migrant Protection Protocols, or MPP,
Hmm.
often called Remain in Mexico. What does the evidence tell us about this policy?
Right, MPP. It has really been a cornerstone of this aggressive approach. It was initially implemented back in January 2019, essentially requiring certain non-Mexican asylum seekers to wait in Mexico for their U.S. immigration court hearings.
And this wasn't a short wait, I gather.
Not at all. It could mean weeks or often even months waiting in Mexico. And the program saw several iterations. It was officially terminated by the Biden administration,
Okay.
but then it was reinstated by court order as MPP 2.0.
Okay.
And most recently, in January 2024, after President Trump took office again, the Department of Homeland Security announced MPP 3.0. So it signals its enduring presence.
Enduring presence. And what has the impact of this policy actually been on the thousands of people waiting in Mexico? The reports, they paint a pretty dire picture.
The human consequences have been nothing short of dire. I mean, there's no other word for it. Imagine thousands of vulnerable families, not just stranded, but left to languish in Mexican border towns for months, often cut off from even basic necessities like food, shelter, clean water, or medical care.
Just the basics.
Just the basics. Shelters were and still are overwhelmed, and the international aid response just lags far behind the actual need. We've seen reports from MSF, that's Doctors Without Borders, their teams treating people for severe respiratory and gastrointestinal diseases just due to the appalling living conditions.
That's awful.
And even more alarming, over half of surveyed migrants have reported experiencing a safety issue or crime while waiting in Mexico. We're talking documented cases of rape, kidnapping, assault, other violent crimes. The vulnerability is just immense.
With all those dangers stacking up, what about the legal side for those seeking asylum? Is due process even possible? Is it upheld in those circumstances, given how precarious their situation is?
Well, not according to our sources, no. Representation rates for those in MPP have been exceedingly low.
How low?
As low as 7.5% in MPP 1.0. Just think about that.
7.5%.
Yeah. And this, combined with the dangers and the instability in these border towns, made it nearly impossible for individuals to successfully gather evidence and win asylum. The reports speak of broken courts in places like El Paso, files just piling up, immense backlogs, long delays for hearings. One specific anecdote from the American Immigration Council details a court with literally hundreds of cases scheduled in a single day.
Hundreds in a day. How can you have a meaningful hearing?
Exactly, making meaningful hearings impossible. The entire system is strained, just strained to its breaking point. And that leads to significant monetary and diplomatic costs for the U.S., sure, but more importantly, a profound denial of justice for asylum seekers.
Okay, so beyond just MPP, the American Immigration Council's report highlights a broader, extreme immigration overhaul under Trump. They even label it as threatening U.S. democracy. This sounds like a much wider strategy. What does that report reveal about the bigger picture?
Right. The key insight from the American Immigration Council isn't just that policies changed, but that the entire immigration system was fundamentally re-engineered, almost weaponized, you could say, to halt legal pathways and humanitarian protections.
Weaponized bureaucracy.
That's a term they use, yeah. The report describes a radical multi-front attack on immigrants and the immigration system itself. It speaks of the end of asylum at the southern border, which included the shutdown of the CDP-1 application.
That's the app for scheduling appointments.
Exactly, the mobile app asylum seekers used to schedule appointments at ports of entry. Shutting it down essentially closed one of the few remaining legal avenues. It also notes the indefinite suspension of the U.S. refugee admissions program for most groups, and the mass revocation of humanitarian parole and temporary protected status, or TPS. That affected over 1 million people in just 6 months.
1 million people.
In 6 months. And then there's the weaponization of bureaucracy. We mentioned massive fee hikes, processing freezes, making it nearly impossible to navigate the system. And it warns of, quote, turbocharging an inhumane detention system, with ICE's detention budget increasing by 308% annually under something called the Big Beautiful Bill Act.
300% increase.
These actions, the report argues, are corrosive to the rule of law itself, transforming the system from one designed, at least in theory, to process claims into one designed primarily to deter and block.
So we have militarization, aggressive, systemic policies. That's a comprehensive approach. Let's talk about the virtual wall now, the part that often goes unseen. What exactly is it, and what does the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF, say about its impact?
Right, the virtual wall. Government officials often use that term for the extensive surveillance technology at the border. However, the EFF critically views this as, and this is their quote, a digital dumpster fire for human rights and civil liberties.
A digital dumpster fire. Strong words.
Very strong. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars poured into technologies like high-tech camera towers, drones, aerostats. Those are the tethered blimps with surveillance gear.
Right, I've seen
The
the
surveillance vehicles, ground sensors, license plate readers, a whole array. The EFF have meticulously mapped over 465 surveillance towers just along the border. And they note this technology isn't just used by federal agencies. State, local, even Mexican government agencies are using it, creating this vast interconnected surveillance network.
That pervasive surveillance sounds, well, daunting. But how effective is this virtual wall, really? Are there any documented downsides or maybe unexpected consequences to this high-tech approach?
Well, surprisingly, yeah. An internal Border Patrol memo actually revealed that a significant portion, 30% of their main camera system, the RVSS towers, are actually broken.
30% are broken.
30%. So despite spending hundreds of millions, a significant chunk of this virtual wall isn't even functional, which raises questions about efficiency, accountability.
Absolutely.
Furthermore, a government accountability office, the GAO assessment, found that CBP failed to address key privacy protections for these surveillance programs.
So privacy wasn't built in?
It seems not adequately, no.
Mm.
And the EFF highlights something else important. The borderlands often serve as a kind of testing ground for military-grade surveillance. Technology tested there then gets deployed in domestic law enforcement contexts, far away from the border.
So it spreads inward.
Exactly. And this raises significant concerns about privacy, data collection, civil liberties for everyone, not just migrants, but for entire communities living in these border regions.
It's clear that despite all these measures, the militarization, the aggressive policies, this virtual wall people are still trying to cross. And tragically, many are perishing. The sources point to a really significant and heartbreaking issue of undercounted deaths. What's the truth here? Why are so many deaths going unacknowledged?
This is an incredibly important point, and it really does reveal a hidden human cost. Researchers like Chilton Tippin, he's a PhD candidate who spent time documenting migrant mortality down in El Paso, found that many deaths are simply not officially counted.
How does that happen? How do they get through the cracks?
Well, it happens if migrants drown in canals, for instance, or if they're found by local first responders, or even civilians before federal agents arrive, or if they die in hospitals after being rescued. Even if remains are discovered by CBP personnel, the death isn't officially reportable if the person was not yet technically on custody. It's kind of systemic loophole.
A loophole that hides the true scale. So the official numbers, they don't reflect the full crisis then.
Not even close, it seems.
What does Tippin and maybe other reports like Wola's say is the underlying reason for this undercounting? Is it just administrative?
Tippin argues pretty forcefully that these deaths go uncounted because it's, quote, inconvenient for the whole political and bordering apparatus to acknowledge the full, deadly consequences of U.S. border policies.
Inconvenient.
That's the word he uses. The Wohl report confirms this trend, noting that the official count of migrant remains surpassed 10,000 for this century alone in 2024.
10,000 since 2000.
Yes. And while overall deaths may have decreased slightly from the absolute highs of 2022, the proportion of deaths relative to the migrant population remains tragically similar. These are preventable deaths, from extreme heat, cold, dehydration, drowning, falls from the border wall. Consequences directly linked to policies that push people into increasingly dangerous and remote crossing points.
Given all of this, what are the overall migration trends we're actually seeing now in 2024? Has this aggressive posture changed who is coming and how? Or are the patterns shifting in maybe unexpected ways?
Well, the data from 2024 does show a temporary decrease in people entering CBP custody. It's the smallest number since 2021, actually.
A decrease. Why?
This decline is attributed to intensified crackdowns by both Mexico. They've really stepped up efforts to block migrants heading north and the U.S., including the Biden administration's asylum rule that bans access between ports of entry when crossing numbers are high.
So the numbers are down in the short term, but is that seen as a long-term solution to the underlying issues driving migration?
Well, WLA notes that there's ample evidence to suggest this lull is likely temporary.
Temporary.
Because the root causes of migration, things like political instability, economic hardship, violence in migrants' home countries, Those things persist. They haven't gone away. What's fascinating here, though, is a demographic shift that our sources highlight.
Oh, what kind of shift?
Children and families now constitute 43% of all migrants encountered. That's the second highest share since 2012.
More families and children.
Exactly.
Huh.
This signifies a return to patterns we saw before the Title 42 Pandemic Authority.
Right, Title 42 was that emergency health order.
Yes, that allowed for rapid expulsions during the pandemic, and it disproportionately affected single adults. So we're seeing a shift back. There's also been a westward shift in migration geography. Tucson and San Diego are now emerging as the busiest sectors along the border.
Interesting. Okay, finally, let's address a really persistent point of discussion, one that often gets conflated with migration, that connection between irregular migration and fentanyl smuggling. What do the sources tell us about this? What's the reality?
Yeah, this raises an important question, and it's one that's often profoundly mischaracterized in public discourse, frankly. The data from our sources is very clear and provides a really crucial insight here.
Okay, what does it say?
There's no significant connection between irregular migration and fentanyl smuggling. We repeat that. No significant connection.
Really? Because you hear that narrative constantly.
Constantly. But the overwhelming truth, based on seizure data, is that the vast majority, 86.1% of fentanyl seizures in 2024, occurred at official border crossings, ports of entry.
At the official crossings, not between them.
Exactly. Not in the remote areas where migrants typically cross irregularly. Furthermore, over 80% of those arrested for possessing fentanyl at ports of entry between 2019 and 2024 were U.S. citizens.
U.S. citizens at ports of entry.
Overwhelmingly. So while fentanyl seizures did drop by about 26% in 2024, the reasons for that aren't fully clear in our sources. The primary methods and the individuals involved in smuggling this dangerous drug are distinct from the migrant population often seen attempting irregular crossings. It's a critical distinction to make, and the data backs it up.
That is a critical distinction. Okay.
Yeah.
So what does all this mean for you, our listener? We've explored the radical transformation of the U.S. Mexico border under the current administration, really driven by this policy of aggressive deterrence. We've seen an unprecedented increase in military presence, advanced surveillance technology, that virtual wall, even if parts are broken. And alongside that, the profound human cost of policies like Remain in Mexico, which trap vulnerable migrants in dangerous, often inhumane conditions. And of course, the tragic reality of undercounted death, which underscores this hidden toll on human lives.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's pretty clear that these aggressive enforcement strategies, while maybe temporarily reducing some numbers, are deeply questioned for their long-term efficacy. And perhaps more importantly, they're actively challenging core democratic principles and fundamental humanitarian values. The sources we looked at highlight urgent calls for a shift towards comprehensive immigration reform. That includes things like well-managed legal migration pathways and a functioning asylum system, seeing that as a more sustainable and humane solution. Which really leaves us with a compelling thought, doesn't it? In a world of increasing global movement, complex root causes pushing people to leave their homes. How do societies truly balance national security with fundamental human rights, with a universal right to seek protection? It's a question that demands continuous reflection and probably evolution in how we approach it.
Thank you for joining us for this exploration on the Global War Watch Network. If you found this discussion informative, please like, share, and subscribe to the Global War Watch Network. We encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments section below, and you can join us on social media. The links are provided in the description. We appreciate you being part of this vital conversation.